our Across the Aisle segment tonight, a new poll reveals that the majority of Black Americans think Confederate monuments should stay. The issue of Confederate monuments, it's a tricky one, and I do understand both sides here. On one hand, the ideas and the practices the Confederacy supported, they were abhorrent, like slavery. And those that fought for the Confederacy were traitors to the United States of America. But it seems like the left's attempts to take down these statues isn't just about racism. And it won't stop at Confederate monuments. And that, I think, is a danger to the history of our nation. Take a look.
Bishop James Dukes is calling for the mayor and Chicago Park District to remove the name of not only George Washington, but also Jackson Park, named after President Andrew Jackson. Jackson, as you know, was the 7th president of the United States. Dukes says they should not be held to such esteem and considered heroes when they participated in the slave trade. He says the changes could be as simple as naming the parks after African American heroes like Harold Washington, Jesse Jackson, and Michael Jackson. He explains why the statue should come down.
It represents, on one hand, a hero to some, a forefather, a revolutionary. But then for us of African-American descent, it represents a person who owned 317 slaves.
With me now, Democratic strategist and former Georgia State Representative LaDawn Jones. LaDawn, good to see you.
Me back.
All right, LaDawn, I want to talk to you about this poll. So this new poll said that the majority of Black Americans don't think Confederate statues should be removed. These are the numbers. 44% of Black Americans think the statues should stay, 40% think they should go, and 11% are unsure about how they feel. What's your take on this?
Well, what I've heard, the majority of people who advocate for the removal is the removal from the public square, but not from history, not from America completely. We don't want to throw them in the bottom of the ocean, but we feel that they should be put in their proper context, in the proper place. And that's usually a museum, a historical museum, or on private property, you can do whatever you want. And so it may be true that 60% in fact said that they think they should not be removed. Of course not from our country. It is a part of our history, but it needs to be placed in appropriate context, because as we can see, as these debates have gone on, the true education and facts behind the Civil War, the Confederacy in general, are not really clear to both sides, not clear enough.
Right, I don't disagree with you, actually. I don't like the idea of having statues in our public square that honor who I consider to be traitors or people who fought. They actively put on a uniform and fought to be able to keep slaves. I find that to be abhorrent. I don't know why we have them. I do fear about erasing history or changing the narrative on history, because especially when a nation like ours has a history like we do, we need to know that. We need to remember that firsthand to make sure that nothing like that ever happens again. But let me just refer back to the video that I played at the beginning of the segment. It's not just advocacy for Confederate heroes, war heroes, for their statues to be removed. I mean, some people are going so far as wanting to erase any reference to slave owners or slavery in our nation. I mean, advocating for our first president, George Washington, a statue of him to be removed because he owned slaves. What do you think of that?
Now, I strongly disagree with that, because we cannot get rid of the idea of slavery. Where the Confederacy is different is, one, the fact that they attempted to split our country on a multitude of issues. But then also, you asked the question, I don't even know why they're there. That's the other reason why Confederate statues are unique, because most of the Confederate statues in our country came up during the 60s, during the Jim Crow era, many of them around the time that the court started desegregating schools, started desegregating marriage. And at that time, it was organizations like Daughters of the Confederate Veterans that started to put these statues up. And that's one of the reasons why they are unique from the other statues of presidents or historical American figures that may have also been slave owners. And it's very important that those on my side who believe that these Confederate statues and flags and things of that sort should come down and into museums, and those who are kind of on the fence, to all join together and be on the same side and make a distinction between the Confederate memorials that were put up in spite of or in the face of the Jim Crow era, separate from those historical figures who may have been great Americans who also owned slaves.
Right. No, I agree with you. I mean, I think it's ridiculous to, I guess, propose the idea of removing George Washington or a statue to Thomas Jefferson just because they owned slaves. Clearly, that was a great sin to which I'm sure they had to answer to their creator, as they should, but that doesn't erase the freedom and liberty that they did enshrine in our nation and in our founding documents. The last thing that concerns me about this issue is the race baiting. We know, you and I have talked about this all the time. I appreciate these conversations, but there are racial issues, racial divide in our nation that needs to be addressed. Yet both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, tend to sensationalize it. And LaDawn, that makes it worse. That doesn't heal the divide. That just exacerbates this wound that needs balm. It doesn't need salt to be rubbed into it. My concern here is that Democrats, in a sense, are making this issue they're creating it into a hyperbole. They're acting like if we tear down these statues, it will solve the racial divide in our nation. Even the minority leader of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, she's condemning these Confederate statues. But where was she the last 8 years when President Obama was president? Why now if it's not just race baiting?
That's very true. So I'll say 2 years ago, while Obama was still in office and I was in the Georgia General Assembly, I put forth active legislation to address the Stone Mountain, our Confederate memorial here in Georgia at that time, because that's when I was in power and authorized to do that. So I agree with you, Liz. I feel like people should not take this as an opportunity because it's hot right now. It's the hot topic. The way that we solve this, there's sensitive issues around this, and I think leadership is responsible for using this opportunity to start a real uncomfortable discussion, a town hall, meetings throughout, using technology, using shows like yours to have a wide platform to have a real conversation. The Confederate monuments alone will not fix race, but it is, for those of us who are concerned with those monuments, a humongous step that lets us know that our government and other citizens understand why it's a sensitive issue, and that goes a long way for making the conversation good. So Nancy Pelosi needs to get it together, and if she really cares, let's start having this real conversation with the money and the platforms that she has, as well as the Republicans who are in leadership too.
Right, exactly. I mean, I would look back to what Nikki Haley did when she was governor in her state, you know, drawing people together, using this as an issue to unify, taking down Confederate flags from government buildings, and she drew her state together. That's what this kind of issue should do. It should draw Americans of every political stripe and every color together instead of, like I said, exacerbating racial divide in our nation. LaDawn, thanks so much for coming on the show. I always love talking to you.